Hi guys and welcome to the channel. I hope you guys are doing well. My name is Aditya. I am an MBBS student and today we are going to start a very interesting and important unit of class 11th called Human Physiology. This particular unit is very important for you if you want to prepare for NEET exam and pursue medical as a career. This unit has almost highest weightage if we talk about zoology portion of the NEET exam. So this unit consists of 7 chapters which tends to explain functioning of different organ systems in our body. The first chapter of this unit is digestion and absorption. This chapter tends to explain how the process of digestion occurs within our body and how this digested food is absorbed by our body. The second chapter of this unit is breathing and exchange of gases. This chapter will help us to understand our respiratory system and how exchange and transport of various gases occur inside our body. Speaking of transport brings us to the third chapter of the unit, that is body fluid and circulation. This chapter deals with the concept of circulation of various fluids within our body and the various organs which aids in this process. Our fourth chapter is excretory products and their elimination. This chapter will explain us how various waste products form inside our body as a result of metabolic processes are removed and excreted. The fifth chapter of this unit is locomotion and movement, which deals with the skeletal framework of our body and teaches us about the bony structures of different regions of our body. The sixth chapter is probably the most important chapter of this unit, which is neural control and coordination. This chapter deals with the organization of our nervous system and how it controls other organ systems and helps them to coordinate with one another. The seventh and the last chapter of this unit is chemical control and coordination. This chapter teaches us about various endocrine glands, their secretions, and the effects produced in our body by their secretions. So, this was just a brief review of what we are going to study in this unit, and by far you would have understood the importance of this unit and how much you have to work on it. So, let's begin with our first chapter, that is digestion and absorption. But wait, before we begin human physiology, at least we should know what it means. The physiology is the branch of science which tends to explain how an organ or an organ system in a living organism works. So basically, human physiology attempts to explain the various mechanisms of the body that makes us a living organism. So in this video, we will be learning about our digestive process. That is, we are going to start with the chapter digestion and absorption. I have already prepared notes for you guys. If you want, you can write them or just pause and screenshot the video and later print them. Do as you like, but I would prefer that you should write notes because by writing yourself, you feel a sense of connection with your notes and you understand them better. Also, if you find any line or statement important that I say, do make sure that you copy it also. Now, we will start with the introduction of the chapter. Before beginning the digestion process of the food, we have to consume or eat food. Now, this is absolutely clear that food is one of the basic requirements of every living organism. Whether microscopic bacteria or macroscopic animal, everyone depends on food to meet their energy requirements. Besides energy, food also provides us with the raw material for the growth and development of the body. As all animals, including human beings, are heterotrophs, that is, we are dependent on other living organisms for our food, so we have to consume food from outside, and the food we consume contains various nutrients. I am absolutely sure that every one of us must have heard this dialogue from our parents that we should eat nutritious food, but what actually is nutritious food? The food that we eat contain various kind of nutrients. Now, the question arises, what are nutrients? Nutrients are those organic and inorganic constituents of our food which provides us with energy as well as with raw materials required to carry out various metabolic processes within our body. Broadly speaking, nutrients in our food can be divided into two major categories, namely macronutrients and micronutrients. Macronutrients consist of various organic nutrients like carbohydrates, proteins, and fats or lipids. These are the major components of our food, and yes, these are also required by our body in large quantities. That's why these are called macronutrients, that is, nutrients that are present in macro means large quantities in our food. Macronutrients are also called proximate principles of food. Micronutrients consist of both organic and inorganic nutrients that are vitamins, minerals, and water. And yes, just to clarify that the vitamins are the organic nutrient and minerals and water are inorganic nutrients. These are also present in our food but in small quantities because these neither provide energy nor raw material for our body, but their deficiencies cause various problems and disease in our body. That's why they are also called protective principles of food. And please don't get confused that macro means large, so macronutrients means large size nutrients. No, Here, macro and micro are used with respect to quantity and not size. Here, macro and micro only reflects that nutrient is present in large or small quantity in our food. So now the organic nutrients that are carbohydrates, proteins and fat in our food are present in polymeric form. A polymer, also known as biomacromolecule, is a very large molecule which is made up of many repeating units called monomers. Don't worry, you are going to study about this in very depth in the biomolecules chapter. These monomers are easily absorbed by our body because their size are very small and can easily cross the wall of the digestive tract, and hence there is a requirement of a system which can convert these polymeric large forms into monomeric forms, and this function is carried out by our digestive system. So the process by which large biomacromolecules are converted into simpler absorbable forms is called digestion. This process is carried out by our digestive system, and this is a mechanical and biochemical process. Mechanical process includes crushing and chewing of food particles in our mouth, which increases the surface area of the food so that various enzymes can act on it more efficiently. And biochemical processes include the action of various enzymes produced inside our body, which catalyzes various digestive reactions. This was all about the introduction of the chapter, and now we shall look at a general diagram of our digestive system. Actually, our digestive system consists of two components. One is alimentary canal and the other is associated glands which release their secretion in the alimentary canal. So, as you can see, this is a general diagram in which alimentary canal and associated glands are shown. Food enters our body through an anterior opening called mouth. From the mouth, it enters a cavity known as buccal cavity. Cavity means an empty space within our body. So, buccal cavity contains a tongue and various teeth. Also, duct of various salivary gland also opens in the buccal cavity, and secretion from these salivary gland mixes with the food. From the buccal cavity, the food enters into pharynx. The pharynx is continuous with the esophagus, which opens into the stomach. Here, the food mixes with the acid, and the food then enters into the small intestine, which has three parts, namely duodenum, jejunum, and ileum. Duodenum is continuous with the stomach, and ileum is continuous with the large intestine. Duodenum is the region where two major digestive glands, namely liver and pancreas, release their secretion. Large intestine is also divided into various parts that are rectum, cecum, and colon. Cecum is the area of the large intestine into which the ileum opens. Rectum is continuous with anus, which is the posterior opening of the alimentary canal through which feces or undigested food is expelled out of the body. After looking at a general diagram of the digestive tract, I am sure that it will be a lot easier for us to understand the rest of the chapter. Now, the whole video is divided into four parts. In the first part of the video, we will look at different parts of the alimentary canal. In the second part of the video, we will study about associated glands of digestion. In the third part of the video, we will look how digestion in various parts of alimentary canal takes place. And in the fourth and the last part of the video, we will look how absorption in our body takes place and digestion related disorders. So we are starting with the first part of the video, that is alimentary canal. We will start from the very beginning of the alimentary canal, that is mouth. Now, mouth is an anterior opening located on the ventral surface of the body. Now, after the entry of the food from our mouth, it reaches the buccal cavity, where a tongue and teeth are present. Tongue is a muscular organ which occupies the floor of the buccal cavity. It is attached to the floor of the buccal cavity by a fold-like structure called frenulum. You can see it when you try to lift your tongue. Then the structure that appears to connect the tongue with the floor of the mouth is called frenulum. Now, every one of us have definitely seen those dot-like structure present on our tongue. Those are called lingual papilla. Papilla are any round or dot-like structure present on an organ, and as we are talking about papilla present on tongue, they are called lingual papilla. Under the surface of these papilla are present taste buds that are sensory in function and provides us the sense of taste. It is because of the presence of these taste buds we are able to taste the food. Also, due to the presence of these papilla, the superior surface of the tongue appears rough while the inferior surface of the tongue is smooth. There are four types of papilla. The first variety of the papilla is the filiform papilla. The important point to remember is that these papilla does not contain taste bud under them. These are small in size and most abundant papilla on our tongue. The second type of papilla is fungiform papilla. These papilla appears as red dot on the tongue and contains taste bud. The third type of papilla is foliate papilla. These papilla are absent in human tongue. The fourth and the last variety of papilla are velate papilla. These papilla are largest in size and also contain taste buds. These are also called circumvallate papilla. An inverted V-shaped furrow called the sulcus terminalis divides the upper surface of the tongue into an anterior oral part and a posterior pharyngeal part. After discussing about tongue, now we will talk about the teeth. The teeth are the organ of mastication of food. Now, the teeth in human bears four following properties: that human teeth are heterodont, human teeth are diffeodont, human teeth are thecodont, and human teeth are bunodont. We will try to understand each of these properties in detail. So, generally, all the mammals contain various types of teeth. Humans contain four different types of teeth, that are incisors, canines, premolars, and molars. Each type of teeth has a specific function and helps in proper mastication of the food. Because of the presence of more than one variety of teeth in our jaw, the human teeth are said to be heterodont. Hetero means different and donts mean dentition or teeth. Now we have two sets of teeth, one in the upper jaw and one in the lower jaw. And also if we divide each jaw vertically from the middle, then we get exact same arrangement of teeth on each side. Now each half of either upper jaw or lower jaw contains all the four types of teeth. Here, a new term called dental formula is introduced, which is used to describe the arrangement and number of each type of teeth present in either half of the upper and lower jaw. I know it's a bit confusing, but you guys are smart enough to understand this. So, the dental formula is in the order such that the first digit or number represents the number of incisors in either half of the upper or lower jaw. The second digit or number corresponds with the number of canines. The third digit corresponds with the premolars and the fourth digit with the number of molars. It will be a lot clearer with the example of dental formula of humans. The dental formula of adult human is 2123 upon 2123. Now we have one numerator with 4 digits and one denominator with another 4 digits. The digits in the numerator corresponds to the number of each type of teeth in either half of the upper jaw. And similarly, the lower digit corresponds to the number of each type of teeth in either half of the lower jaw. Here, 2 represents the number of incisors in either half of the upper or lower jaw. Then, 1 represents the number of canines in either half of upper or lower jaw. Similarly, the next digit, that is 2, represents the number of premolars and the last digit represents the number of molars. Now, during our growth, we see that some of our teeth breaks naturally and some by our parents also. We also see that teeth which break or shed again reappears after some time. The first set of teeth which breaks during childhood are called deciduous or milk teeth. Because of the reappearance of teeth in humans, our teeth are said to be diffeodont. That is, our teeth appears twice during our lifetime. But there are few exceptions which will be clear after we study the dental formula of kid. The dental formula of kid is 2102 upon 2102. Here we can clearly see that the number of incisors in canine are same as that of adult, but there are no premolars and only 2 sets of molars are present instead of 3. It tells us that kids lack premolars and last set of molars, and these premolars and one set of molar appear only once during our life and are called monophyodont. Mono means once and donts mean dentine or teeth. By far, we have discussed 2 properties of human teeth which were a bit difficult to understand, but the rest 2 are very easy. The human teeth are said to be thecodont because the teeth of the human are embedded in the jaw sockets. This type of dentition is present in reptiles and mammals. The human teeth are called bunodont due to the presence of rounded, blunt cusp or cavity on their superior surface. It was all about teeth, and now we will leave the buccal cavity and enter the pharynx. The pharynx is located just behind the buccal cavity and serve as the common passage for both air and food. The food through the pharynx enters into esophagus and the air enters into the trachea. The windpipe, that is trachea, is closed by a cartilaginous flap called epiglottis during swallowing of the food into esophagus to prevent the entry of food into windpipe. The pharynx also contains lymphoid tissue called tonsils. Tonsils are actually secondary lymphoid organs which are associated with maturation and activation of lymphocytes which play major role in body's immunological response. Don't worry, you will study about lymphoid organs in detail in the body fluid and circulation chapter and about immune system in the class 12th. There are four types of tonsil in the pharynx, arranged in a ring-like structure called Waldeur's ring. These four types of tonsils are nasopharyngeal or pharyngeal tonsil, tubal tonsil, palatine tonsil, and lingual tonsil. So now the food enters the esophagus from the pharynx. Esophagus is a thin muscular tube extending from the pharynx to the stomach. Esophagus passes from the neck, thorax, that is chest, and diaphragm to reach the stomach. The opening of esophagus into stomach is regulated by a muscular sphincter called gastroesophageal sphincter. A sphincter is a ring-like structure around a tube which is formed by a circular muscle which remains in contracted state normally. Due to the contraction of this circular sphincter, the tube is constricted and the materials in the tube are not allowed to cross it. The narrowing of the tube is opened when the muscles of the sphincter relaxes. After the food crosses through gastroesophageal sphincter, it enters into the stomach. The gastroesophageal sphincter prevents re-entry of food from stomach into the esophagus. The stomach is a J-shaped bag-like organ. It is located in the upper left portion of the abdomen just below the diaphragm. It consists of four major parts that are cardiac. It is the portion of stomach in which the esophagus open. Fundus, body, which forms the main portion of the stomach, and pyloric, which is continuous with the first part of the small intestine. Now, the opening of pyloric part of stomach into the first part of the small intestine, that is duodenum, is regulated by another sphincter named as pyloric sphincter. The food from the stomach now enters into the small intestine. The small intestine is divided into three parts, namely duodenum, jejunum, and ileum. Duodenum is C-shaped and forms the first part of the small intestine. The secretions from the liver and pancreas is released into the duodenum. Jejunum is the middle, highly coiled part of the small intestine. It is longer than the duodenum but shorter in length than ileum. It is the area where maximum digestion of food occurs. Ileum, the last part of the small intestine, is the longest part of the small intestine. It is a highly coiled structure because it is the area where maximum absorption of food takes place. Diffused patches of lymphoid tissue are present throughout the small intestine and are aggregated, means combined, in the ileum to form Peyer's patches. It means that lymphoid tissue exists throughout the small intestine, but in ileum, lymphoid tissue combines and aggregates and forms patches like structure called Peyer's patches. The undigested food from the small intestine is passed to the large intestine. The large intestine is also divided into three major parts that are cecum, colon, and rectum. Cecum is the first part of the large intestine. The opening of ileum into cecum is guarded by an ileocecal valve. Ileocecal valve prevents backflow of materials from cecum into ileum. Cecum is a small structure which also hosts some symbiotic microorganism. A finger-like structure called vermiform appendix projects from the cecum. Vermiform appendix is a vestigial organ. Vestigial organs are the organs which were believed to be functional in our ancestors, but during the course of evolution, they become non-functional and now they remain in the body but do not perform any specific function. The cecum is continuous with colon. Now, colon has further four parts that are ascending colon, transverse colon, descending colon, and sigmoid colon. The sigmoid colon is continuous with the rectum. Rectum is the last part of the large intestine as well as it is the last part of the whole alimentary canal, and it serves as a storage site of fecal matter. It discharges its fecal matter outside the body through a posterior opening called anus by the process of defecation. This was a detailed description of all the structure of the alimentary canal. Now we will study the histology of the alimentary canal. Studying the histology of the alimentary canal allows to understand various modification of the wall of alimentary canal in different regions. The wall of the alimentary canal starting from the esophagus up to the rectum consists of four basic layers, namely the first layer and the outermost layer is serosa. It is made up of mesothelium. Mesothelium is a layer of cells which lines the outermost surface of the visceral organ. Visceral organs means internal organs. It's just a fancy word for a simple term. Serosa helps in attachment of digestive tract with the surrounding structures. The second layer from outwards is the muscularis layer, which consists of smooth muscles which are arranged into two different layers of muscle that are an outer longitudinal smooth muscle layer and an inner circular smooth muscle layer. We can see modifications of muscularis layer in the stomach and the colon. In stomach, there are actually three layers of smooth muscle that are innermost oblique smooth muscle layer, middle circular smooth muscle layer, and outermost longitudinal smooth muscle layer. However, in the colon, the muscularis layer contains three layers or bands of only longitudinal smooth muscle called taeniae coli. The contraction of these muscles of the muscularis is responsible for the peristaltic movements that occurs throughout the digestive tract. Peristaltic movements helps to keep the food in continuous movement within our digestive tract. Submucosa layer is the third layer from outside and it is made up of loose connective tissue containing nerves, blood vessels and lymph vessels. Submucosa show modification in the duodenal part of the small intestine. In duodenum, Brunner's gland is present in the submucosal layer which secretes mucus. And the last and the innermost layer of our digestive tract is mucosa. The mucosa layer lines the lumen of the alimentary canal. This layer shows a large number of modifications throughout the digestive tract. It forms small irregular folds called ryugi in the stomach. Ryugi both allows the stomach to stretch in order to accommodate large meals and helps to grip and move food during digestion. Mucosa also form folds in the small intestine called plicae circulares, from which small finger-like foldings extend into the lumen of the alimentary canal called villi. Further, the cells lining the villi form various smaller microscopic projections called microvilli, which helps in greatly increasing the surface area of the absorptive surface. These villi are supplied by a network of capillaries and a large lymph vessel called lacteal. In duodenum, the base of the villi extends deep and invaginates the mucosa. The crypts or the space so formed between the base of the villi are called crypts of Le Bacun. We have looked at the different layers of the alimentary canal and their modification in different regions throughout our digestive system. Now we will look into another structure present between these layers of the digestive tract. They are called plexus. A plexus is a structure formed due to intersection of various nerves. For example, 10 nerves combines and forms a plexus. Plexus then release its own efferents and efferents. The efferents bring information towards the plexus, while the efferents take that information away from the plexus to the target organ. Hence, plexus act as a local control system of a region which control various activities. Now this diagram was just to explain what is plexus and how they are formed. This does not have any relevance because this was just an imaginary diagram. You will study about various plexus in detail during the first year of the MBBS. There are two plexus in the wall of the alimentary canal. The first plexus is myenteric plexus or plexus of Orbach. This plexus contains nerves from both autonomic division, that is, it contains both sympathetic and parasympathetic nerves. In general, activation of parasympathetic nerve increases the peristaltic movement, while activation of sympathetic nerve decreases peristaltic movement. Yes, we can conclude from here that myenteric plexus control peristaltic movements of the digestive tract and it is located between the longitudinal and circular smooth muscle of the muscularis layer. Second plexus is called the Meissner plexus or submucosal plexus. This plexus is present between the muscularis and mucosal layer of the digestive wall, that is, it is present into submucosal layer of the digestive tract. It controls the secretion of digestive gland into digestive tract. Guys, we have discussed almost everything important about the structure of the alimentary canal, and this is more than enough for your NEET exam, but make sure you go through each and every word very carefully. Now we will look at the second part of the video, that is associated gland of digestion or digestive glands. Now we will start with the digestive glands which help in the process of digestion with the help of their secretory product called enzymes. The main digestive glands in humans are salivary gland, liver and pancreas. There are three pairs of salivary gland in humans which secrete their enzyme into the buccal cavity. These three pairs of salivary gland are named parotid salivary gland. There are two parotid salivary glands situated just outside the buccal cavity in the cheek portion of the face. These are the largest salivary gland in the humans. Submaxillary or submandibular salivary glands. There are two submaxillary or submandibular salivary glands located just outside the buccal cavity near the lower jaw. Sublingual salivary gland. There are two sublingual salivary glands also situated outside the buccal cavity at the floor of the buccal cavity below the tongue. These are the smallest salivary glands in the humans. All these salivary glands secrete salivary juice or saliva in the buccal cavity. Daily secretion of the saliva is about 1.5 liter with a pH of about 6.8. The salivary juice contains salivary amylase, also called ptyalin, and lysozyme. Parasympathetic activity increases salivary secretion, while sympathetic stimulation decreases salivary secretion. Liver is the largest gland in the body. It weighs about 1.2 to 1.5 kg in adults. Liver is located on the upper portion of the abdominal cavity just below the diaphragm. It has two lobes, one right lobe and one left lobe. Both these lobes are unequal in size, right lobe being larger than the left lobe. Hepatic lobules are the structural and functional unit of the liver. Here is a diagram of how a hepatic lobule looks like. Hepatic lobules are hexagonal structure. Hepatic lobule is covered by a thin connective tissue sheet called Glissen's capsule. Each hepatic lobule contains cord of hepatocyte converging towards the central vein in the middle of hepatic lobule. The space between these cord is called hepatic sinusoids. In these sinusoids, Kupffer cells are present. These are phagocytic cells which ingest or eat any foreign microorganism and provide local immunological response. Except for Kupffer cell, another type of cell are also present in the hepatic sinusoids called fat storing cell. At each corner of the hexagon are present portal triad. Portal triad contain three vessels, namely a branch of hepatic portal vein, a branch of hepatic artery, and a branch of interlobar bile duct. Hepatocytes secrete bile and transport it to the gallbladder with the help of hepatic ducts. Gallbladder is a thin muscular sac with the capacity of 30 to 50 milliliter. It stores and concentrates the bile juice before its secretion in the digestive tract. The duct from the gallbladder, cystic duct, along with the duct from the liver forms common bile duct. Pancreas is a mixed or compound gland. Pancreas is located between the limbs of the C-shaped duodenum. A mixed or compound gland is a gland which acts as an endocrine as well as an exocrine gland. I believe everyone must be familiar with the term exocrine and endocrine gland. If not, don't worry and listen carefully. Exocrine glands are the glands which release their secretion with the help of a duct on the target organ. For example, salivary gland are exocrine gland which secrete their secretion saliva in the buccal cavity through duct, while endocrine glands are the glands which lack ducts and release their secretion directly into the blood. Through blood, their secretion reaches the target organ on which they work. You will be studying about endocrine gland in detail later in this unit. The exocrine part of the pancreas secrete an alkaline pancreatic juice into the duodenum. The pancreas has two ducts. First is the duct of Santorini. It is an accessory and non-functional duct. The other is duct of Wirsum. It is a duct which opens into the duodenum and is the functional duct of the pancreas. The common hepatic duct along with the pancreatic duct joins to form a common hepatopancreatic duct which serves as a common passage for bile juice and alkaline pancreatic juice. This hepatopancreatic duct opens in the first part of the small intestine, that is duodenum. The opening of common hepatopancreatic duct into the duodenum is guarded by a sphincter called sphincter of Oddi. We have completed the discussion about the digestive glands also. Now we will move on to the third part of the video and look how the process of digestion of various nutrients take place in different regions of the digestive tract. Digestion in mouth is a mechanical and chemical process. When the food enters into the buccal cavity, the teeth causes mastication of food and breaks it into very small pieces which increases the surface area of the food. This increased surface area causes faster and easier digestion of food. Now, this masticated food mixes with the salivary secretion of the salivary gland. Tongue helps in this process of mixing of food with saliva thoroughly, apart from being the sensory organ of taste. The mucus present in the saliva causes adhering, means sticking of this masticated food together and forms a mass of food called bolus. This bolus is passed into the pharynx from where it enters into the esophagus by a process called swallowing or deglutition. The mucus in the saliva also helps in the lubrication of this process and allows smooth passage of bolus into the esophagus. Saliva also contains some electrolytes like sodium, potassium, chloride, and bicarbonate ions. Apart from these ions, saliva also contains enzymes, namely salivary amylase, also known as ptyalin and lysozyme. So, the chemical process of digestion begins in the mouth by the help of the enzyme salivary amylase. This enzyme works on the carbohydrates and converts 30% of the starch present in the food into a disaccharide called maltose. The presence of chloride ions is necessary for this reaction and it works at a pH of 6.8. The other enzyme present in the saliva, that is lysozyme, is an antibacterial agent that prevents oral infection due to the various bacteria present in the food. After the digestion of food in mouth, its further digestion takes place in the stomach. The enzymes and the acid, that is hydrochloric acid, is secreted by the gastric gland present in the gastric mucosa. Gastric mucosa contains three types of cell, namely mucous neck cells. These cells secrete mucus. Peptic cells or chief cells. These cells secrete proenzyme pepsinogen. Proenzyme is an inactivated form of an enzyme which is converted into activated form when required by the body. Parietal cells or oxyntric cell. These cells secrete HCl and intrinsic factor. Intrinsic factor is required for the absorption of vitamin B12. The food in the stomach is stored for about 4 to 5 hours, during which it mixes with the gastric juice containing acid and other enzymes and factor. The food is mixed thoroughly with the acidic content of the stomach by the churning movement, wave-like movement of the stomach. After the thorough mixing of the food, the mixture of food with gastric juice so formed is called the chyme. The pepsinogen is the proteolytic enzyme of the stomach in adults because it helps in the digestion of proteins. It is a very important statement because it has been asked many times that which of the following is the proteolytic enzyme of stomach in adults. Then the answer is pepsinogen. As I told earlier that pepsinogen is a proenzyme or inactivated enzyme, so it has to be activated. Pepsinogen is activated by the HCl present in the gastric juice into an activated enzyme, pepsin. Pepsin is a protein digesting enzyme which converts proteins present in food into proteoses and peptones. Proteoses and peptones are intermediate peptides formed by incomplete digestion of proteins. The HCl in the stomach perform many other functions apart from activating pepsinogen. HCl is also required for the activity of pepsin hormone apart from its activation. HCl is also responsible for conversion of ferric ions into ferrous ions, which is the absorbable form of iron. Non-secretion of HCl, a condition known as achlorohydria, can lead to iron deficiency anemia. Now a question arises that how does our stomach protect itself from such a strong acid? Well, nature is very smart. It has provided us with a layer made up of mucus and bicarbonate ions which lines the inner surface of the stomach and forms a barrier between the acid and the stomach's inner surface. This mucus bicarbonate layer is responsible for protection of stomach from this extremely dangerous acid. In the NCERT it is written that mucus and bicarbonate plays important role in protection from excoriation by this concentrated HCl. Excoriation means appearance of burning scar over the skin of a region. Now, in infants, renin is present as a proteolytic enzyme in the gastric juice. Renin helps in the digestion of milk protein in infants. Small amount of lipases are also secreted in the gastric juice by the gastric glands. And the last fact that I would like to discuss is that absorption of alcohol takes place in the stomach. And yes, it is also a fact that when the alcohol reaches the stomach, it initiates secretion of HCl from the gastric glands. And one must eat food after drinking alcohol to overcome that extra acidity, otherwise burning sensation will be felt which can cause various burning disease like ulcer in the stomach and esophagus. This was all about the digestion in stomach. Further, digestion of food is carried out in the small intestine where maximum digestion of food takes place. Various types of the movements generated by the muscularis layer of the wall helps in the thorough mixing of food with various secretions of the small intestine and thus facilitates digestion. Bile, pancreatic juice and intestinal juice are the secretions which are released in the small intestine. Pancreatic juice contain inactivate enzyme trypsinogen, chymotrypsinogen, procarboxypeptidase, amylases, nucleases and lipases. The inactivated enzyme trypsinogen is activated by an enzyme enterokinase which is secreted by the intestinal mucosa into an active enzyme trypsin. This activated enzyme trypsin now activates other inactivated enzymes of the pancreatic juice. The bile released into the duodenum contains bile pigments, bilirubin, biliverdin, bile salts, sodium bicarbonate, sodium glycocolate, sodium taurocolate, cholesterol, and phospholipids. Always remember that bile juice does not contain any enzyme. Bile helps in the emulsification of the fats, that is, broke down of large fat molecules into small micelles. Micelles are the combination of fatty acid, monoacylglycerol, and bile salt. Bile also activates lipases present in the pancreatic juice and intestinal juice. The intestinal mucosa, that is the mucosa or the innermost layer of the intestine wall, has goblet cells which secrete mucus. The secretions from the crypts of labor cone present between the base of the villi along with the secretions of these goblet cells forms the intestinal juice. The intestinal juice is also called succus entericus. The intestinal juice contains various enzymes like disaccharidases, dipeptidases, nucleosidases, lipases, etc. The mucus from the goblet cell along with the bicarbonate ion from the pancreas protect the intestinal mucosa from the acidic chyme as well as helps to neutralize this acidity due to the pH of 7.8. This ensures the activity of various enzymes because enzymes cannot work at such low pH. Now, the proteins, peptones, and proteoses present in the chyme are acted by various pancreatic enzymes like trypsin, chymotrypsin, and procarboxypeptidase into dipeptides. Similarly, carbohydrates in the chyme are digested by the pancreatic amylase, also known as amylopsin, and are converted into different disaccharides that are maltose, sucrose, and lactose. The fats in the chyme are converted into di and monoglycerides by the enzyme lipases. The enzymes nucleases act on the nucleic acids and converts them into nucleotides and nucleosides. After the digestion of the chyme by the pancreatic and bile juice, enzymes from the intestinal juice works on the product form and convert them into final absorbable form. Now, the dipeptides so formed are converted into monopeptides by the enzyme dipeptidases. Similarly, the three disaccharides formed by carbohydrate digestion are converted into monosaccharides by the enzyme lactase, sucrase, and maltase. The nucleotides are converted into nucleoside by the enzyme nucleotidases. Further, these nucleosides are broken down into sugar and nitrogenous base by the enzyme nucleosidases. The di and monoglycerides are converted into fatty acid and glycerol by the enzyme lipases. So, the breakdown of most biomacromolecules occurs in the duodenum and the absorption occurs in the jejunum and ileum. The undigested food is passed into the large intestine. Now, it's very important to discuss that what happens to the undigested food and whether further digestion occurs in large intestine or not. So first, make it very clear that no further digestion of food takes place in the large intestine. Also, no further absorption of any of the nutrient discussed above takes place in large intestine. Only absorption of some water, some electrolytes and certain drugs occur in the large intestine. The large intestine in fact secrete mucus in the lumen which helps in adhering and lubrication and movement of undigested food towards the rectum. The undigested waste product called the feces are temporarily stored in the rectum and then expelled out by the process of defecation. Now, it is very important to understand that there has to be a proper coordinating system in the digestive tract to ensure release of various enzymes at the right time and to control the peristaltic activity of the wall of the alimentary canal. So, our digestive system is under the control of both neural and hormonal system of the body. It means that along with brain and spinal cord, various endocrine tissues or gland play a major role in the control and coordination of the digestive tract. For example, when you see your favorite food or even when you smell your favorite dish, the saliva starts to secrete in your mouth. That's why tasty food are always called mouth-watering because they cause secretion of saliva in your mouth. Now, you can relate that how only sense of smell of food can cause salivary secretion in your mouth. This is caused by various signals generated by our nose or eyes which tells brain or spinal cord that your favorite dish has arrived, so they sends a message to the salivary gland to start secreting saliva for welcoming your favorite food. Similarly, the brain also sends message to the stomach to be ready to start secreting acid and gastric juice because the food is about to enter in the esophagus. So, this is a very coordinated system which is necessary for proper digestion and absorption of food. The endocrine system also plays major role in proper coordination in the digestive tract. Various hormones are released by the gastric and the intestinal mucosa, which causes release of various enzymes by the digestive glands. Absence of secretion of these hormones may lead to many disorders and cause no digestion and absorption of food in the stomach and small intestine. So now the last topic of the third part of this video is calorific value of protein, carbohydrates and fats. I am 100% sure that every one of us have heard these things like we should burn more calories in order to reduce weight, but have you ever wondered that what does a calorie mean and how losing calories help us to reduce our weight? If not, let's find out. Now we have studied that protein, carbohydrates and fats provide us with energy, but we didn't study that exactly how much energy did they provide. And by energy here I mean by heat energy because heat is the ultimate form of energy. So to answer all these questions, we have to study the calorific value of protein, carbohydrates and fats. So 1 calorie is defined as the amount of energy required to raise the temperature of 1 gram of water from a temperature of 14.5 degrees Celsius to 15.5 degrees Celsius. Try to understand it like this, that in a beaker you have 1 gram of water. The temperature of the water is 14.5 degrees Celsius and you want to raise its temperature by 1 degree, that is, you want to make the temperature of the water 15.5 degrees Celsius. So, The amount of heat energy that you will give the water at 14.5 degrees Celsius to raise its temperature to 15.5 degrees Celsius is called 1 calorie. Calorie is unit of heat. Joule is also a unit of heat. The relation between 1 joule and 1 calorie is that 1 calorie is equal to 4.2 joule approx. The exact value is 4.184 joule, but approximately it is considered as 4.2 joule. Now we have understood that food provides us with energy which is measured in terms of heat energy as calorie or joule. So now we have to understand how much energy does protein, carbohydrates and fats provide us. So the answer of this question is a factual answer that you have to learn it because it is practically determined by burning 1 gram of protein, carbohydrates and fat in a device called bomb calorimeter. The calorific value is defined as the amount of heat energy released by burning 1 gram of a substance, whether protein, carbohydrate or fat, in a bomb calorimeter. And it is seen that the calorific value of protein is 4.1 kilocalorie per gram, carbohydrates is 5.65 kilocalorie per gram, and that of fats is 9.45 kilocalorie per gram. Now, what does these value mean? Look at the calorific value of protein. It is equal to 4.1 kilocalorie per gram. This indicates that 4.1 kilocalorie, which is equal to 4100 calorie, is released when 1 gram of protein is burned in a bomb calorimeter. The concept is same for both carbohydrates and fat also. These values are called gross calorific value. These are the amount of energy which should have been released, and these are theoretical values, but in practical life some deviations are there. The actual or physiological calorific value of protein, carbohydrates and fats are 4 kilocalorie per gram, 4 kilocalorie per gram and 9 kilocalorie per gram respectively. Now the question arises why there is a difference between the gross and physiological values. This difference is due to energy which is used for the digestion, absorption and transport of these nutrients by our body. So this was all about the third part of the video. I know things are getting a bit complicated, but these are the topics that if you understood once will remain with you throughout your life, and you have to do only two things right now. First, try and understand every concept from the video, rewind and watch again if you have any doubt, and the second thing is read NCERT very carefully. If you will just remember these notes and NCERT, you will see that at the end of this unit you will be able to easily answer all the questions from this unit. And don't worry, I have covered all topics from NCERT and the notes are only the easier version of the NCERT. Now we will begin with the last part of this video, in which we will study about absorption of the digested food and various digestive disorders. So let's begin. Absorption is the process by which the end products of digestion are transported across the mucosa of the alimentary canal into blood and lymph vessels. There are three transport mechanisms which carry out the process of absorption. These are: the first mechanism is the active transport or uphill transport. This transport mechanism is used to transport a substance from a region of low concentration to a region of high concentration by using energy in the form of ATP. It means it helps to transport substance against their concentration gradient. Generally, substance move from a region of their high concentration to a region of low concentration, but in active transport, exactly opposite thing occurs, and this transport method uses energy for this process. This method of transport is also called uphill transport because when you climb a hill, we have to use our energy in order to reach the peak. The second mechanism is the passive transport or downhill transport. This transport mechanism is used to transport a substance from a region of their high concentration to a region of their low concentration without any expenditure of energy. This method of transport is also called downhill transport because when we travel down a hill, we don't have to put a lot of effort because gravity helps in this process. Similarly, in passive transport, concentration gradient of the substance helps in this process. The third mechanism is the facilitated transport. This mechanism uses specialized transport carrier protein to transport substance across a membrane. This is a kind of passive transport and does not utilize any energy. This is used when the substance, due to any limitation, is not able to cross the membrane even in the presence of concentration gradient. Monosaccharides like glucose and amino acids are transported across the intestinal mucosa by all three methods. However, absorption of water depends on the osmotic gradient, that is, water moves from a region of low osmolarity to a region of high osmolarity. Here you can use the term concentration in place of osmolarity to understand this concept. But remember, in chemistry, the term concentration and osmolarity are different. Now we have to look at a special case of absorption of fatty acid and glycerol, that are the digested products formed after lipid digestion. Fatty acid and glycerol, being very large in size, cannot cross the intestinal mucosa. In NCERT, it is written that they are insoluble, that's why they cannot enter into blood. NCERT wants to say that fatty acids and glycerol are insoluble in the wall of alimentary canal, and due to their very large size they cannot enter into blood capillaries. So the fatty acid and glycerol are converted into small droplets called micelles. Micelles are formed by the covering of bile salts on the outer surface of the fatty acid and glycerol. These micelles then enter into intestinal mucosa, where they again undergo modification and are converted into chylomicrons. Chylomicrons are formed by a covering of a small protein layer around these fat globules. Chylomicrons are then transported into the lacteal. The lymph in the lacteal later on mixes with the blood, and hence absorption of fatty acids and glycerol is completed. The absorption of various nutrients occurs throughout our digestive tract, but maximum absorption occurs in the small intestine. After the absorption of all the nutrients, they are transported to the various tissue across the body. This process is called assimilation. In the tissue, metabolism of these nutrients occurs, which release energy. This was all about the absorption of digestive products. Now we will look at the last topic of this chapter, that is digestive disorders. The first disorder is called jaundice. In this disorder, our liver is affected and the bile is released in excessive amounts, due to which our eyes, nails, and skin turns yellow due to deposition of the bile pigments. The second condition is called vomiting. In this condition, all the content of the stomach is expelled rapidly from the mouth. This reflex action is produced by the vomit center located in the medulla of the brain. The third disorder is called diarrhea. It is a condition in which there is increased liquidity in the feces and the bowel movement of the wall of alimentary canal increases. The absorption of food is greatly reduced in this condition, and the patient tends to lose excessive fluid from the body through feces, which leads to dehydration of the body. The fourth condition is called constipation. In constipation, the feces are retained within the colon due to irregular bowel movements. The roughage in the food prevents this condition. That's why salads are very important for our healthy digestive system, because they provide us with the necessary roughage for the body. The fifth condition is called indigestion. As the name suggests, in this condition the food is not properly digested due to inadequate digestive enzyme secretion, maybe due to food poisoning, maybe due to excessive spicy food, or maybe due to anxiety. I have told you guys earlier that our neural system voluntarily and involuntarily controls our digestive system. So anxiety and other abnormal conditions of the neural system will definitely affect our digestive system. The last disorder is a bit different one and is called protein energy malnutrition, PEM. This condition arises due to dietary deficiency of protein as well as due to insufficient calorie intake. This is seen in the population which suffers from hunger and does not have enough food for survival. There are two conditions under PEM, namely marasmus. This condition is seen in the infants below the 1 year of age and is seen when mother's milk is replaced too early for the child and the food which is given in place of milk is deprived of proteins and calories. The second condition is called kwashiorkor. This condition of PEM is seen in the individuals greater than 1 year of age having protein deficiency which is unaccompanied by calorie deficiency. It means it is seen in children that are not given the mother's milk, instead they are given a high calorie diet which completely lacks proteins. So guys, this was all about this chapter. I know it's a lot to study, but don't worry, as I said earlier, this is very easy if you will understand it once. Now, what you have to do is read, understand and remember notes that I will upload at the end of this video, so stay tuned for it. And you have to read NCERT after learning notes. But yes, please read NCERT, it is must, and then you are ready to move on to next chapter. I hope you guys understand some new concept from this video. If you guys understood anything from this video, I will consider it as a win. Thank you for watching this video. If you like this video, do give it a thumbs up and make sure you subscribe to the channel so you won't miss any other video. See you in the next video with the topic breathing and exchange of gases. Bye bye.